Welcome back to Globewise TV, where cinema isn't just entertainment, it's a battlefield of ideas, emotions, and controversy. Tonight, we're diving into the world of films that didn't just shock audiences, they divided nations, sparked outrage, and redefined what movies are allowed to show on screen. From banned releases to Oscar scandals and cultural backlash, these are the stories that pushed society to its breaking point. This is 10 Most Controversial Films Ever Unleashed on Society, a countdown of movies that made people walk out of theaters, start global debates, and question everything they thought they knew about cinema. And before we begin, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to Globewise TV and drop a comment below. Your support keeps these stories alive and helps us bring you even more powerful deep dives every week. Now, turn down the lights because things are about to get controversial. 10. The Exorcist, 1973. The film that made audiences faint, vomit, and question reality. In 1973, cinema didn't just change, it shook. When The Exorcist first hit theaters, it wasn't introduced as just another horror movie, it arrived like a cultural earthquake. Based on William Peter Blatty's novel, the story follows a young girl possessed by a terrifying demonic force and the desperate battle to save her soul. But what unfolded on screen was only half the story. The real controversy began outside the film. Audiences reportedly fainted mid-screening. Emergency services were called to theaters. People walked out trembling, some refusing to return to finish the film. Churches across America condemned it, calling it blasphemous and spiritually dangerous. In some cities, protests formed outside cinemas, demanding the film be banned entirely. And yet, the more it was condemned, the bigger it became. The marketing didn't shy away from the chaos, it amplified it. Headlines about possessed audiences and cursed screenings spread faster than any trailer ever could. What was meant to scare viewers turned into something far more powerful. A cultural obsession. But the deepest controversy wasn't just about shock value. It was about belief. For many, the film blurred the line between fiction and faith. Was it just cinema, or something that should never have been shown at all? Decades later, The Exorcist still holds its place not just as a horror classic, but as one of the most disturbing and debated films ever released. Proof that sometimes, the most powerful fear is the one that follows you out of the theater. And this is just number 10. 9. Dogma, 1999. The film that turned faith into firestorm. In 1999, a film arrived that didn't just challenge Hollywood, it challenged belief itself. Its name was Dogma, a bold, irreverent fantasy comedy from filmmaker Kevin Smith that took aim at religion, tradition, and the very structure of divine authority. At first glance, it looked like a typical offbeat comedy. Angels with attitude, sarcastic prophets, and a couple of unlikely humans caught in a cosmic misunderstanding. But beneath the humor was something far more provocative, a story that questioned how faith is interpreted, who gets to define religious truth, and whether institutions always reflect the message they claim to protect. The controversy ignited even before release. Religious groups accused the film of mocking sacred beliefs, with protests calling for boycotts and bans. Some critics labeled it blasphemous, arguing that turning angels and religious figures into comedic characters crossed a line Hollywood should never touch. But Kevin Smith stood his ground. He argued that Dogma wasn't an attack on faith. It was an exploration of how faith and organized religion can drift apart. Still, that explanation did little to calm the storm. For many, the film felt like a direct challenge to deeply held convictions. The backlash became so intense that distribution was difficult, and security concerns followed the film's release. Yet ironically, the controversy only fueled its cult status. Audiences who watched it discovered a film that was not just provocative, but also surprisingly philosophical, mixing absurd humor with genuine questions about belief, forgiveness, and meaning. Over time, Dogma transformed from the film people were warned about into a cult classic studied for its daring narrative and unapologetic voice. It remains a reminder that cinema can provoke laughter, anger, and reflection all at once. And in the world of controversial films, Dogma stands as proof that sometimes the loudest backlash creates the most lasting legacy. 8. American Psycho, 2000. In the late 1990s, just as Wall Street culture was being celebrated as the ultimate symbol of success, a film arrived like a perfectly sharpened blade, cold, stylish, and deeply unsettling. That film was American Psycho, 2000. At first glance, it looks like luxury paradise. Designer suits, expensive apartments, power lunches, business cards discussed with obsessive precision, as if they matter more than human lives. The world of Patrick Bateman feels polished, controlled, almost enviable. But beneath that glossy surface lies something far more disturbing. Bateman, played with chilling perfection, isn't just a wealthy investment banker. He is a man completely detached from reality, identity, and empathy. As the story unfolds, the line between reality and hallucination begins to blur. Violence appears suddenly, without emotional weight. And that's exactly what made audiences so uncomfortable. Because the film doesn't behave like a typical thriller. It doesn't guide you with clear morality or comfort you with explanation. Instead, it forces a question that lingered long after the credits rolled. Is this man truly a monster, or is he a mirror of the world around him? When the film was released, critics and audiences were divided. Some called it a savage satire of greed, ego, and consumer obsession. Others saw it as dangerously provocative, too stylish in its portrayal of brutality, too ambiguous in its message, and too willing to blur fantasy with reality. And that ambiguity is exactly why it became so controversial. Over time, American Psycho stopped being just a shocking film and became a cultural reference point. A dark reflection of modern obsession with image, status, and perfection, where identity can be manufactured and morality can quietly disappear behind a polished smile. Because in the end, the most disturbing part of American Psycho isn't what Patrick Bateman does. It's how familiar his world feels. 7. Blue Velvet, 1986, The Beautiful Town with a Rotting Secret. When audiences first stepped into the world of Blue Velvet, they expected a nostalgic slice of small-town America. Instead, they were pulled into a nightmare hiding beneath the picket fences. Blue Velvet, directed by David Lynch, opens with an almost dreamlike image, bright blue skies, perfect lawns, and a peaceful suburban rhythm. But that illusion is violently shattered when a young man discovers a severed human ear in a field. What follows is not just a mystery, but a descent into a disturbing underworld of crime, obsession, and psychological decay. At the time of release, the film shocked audiences and critics alike. Many were unsettled by its raw depiction of sadism, sexual violence, and emotional manipulation, elements rarely explored so openly in mainstream cinema during the 1980s. Yet what made it truly controversial wasn't just its content, but its message, that darkness doesn't exist in distant places, it lives right under the surface of normal life. Some called it genius. Others called it disturbing exploitation disguised as art. But no one could ignore it. Even today, Blue Velvet remains a dividing line in film history, a movie that forced viewers to question comfort, innocence, and the hidden corruption of everyday society. 6. Monty Python's Life of Brian, 1979. Imagine releasing a comedy so bold that entire countries try to ban it. That's exactly what happened when Life of Brian hit theaters in 1979. Created by the legendary comedy group Monty Python, the film followed Brian Cohen, an ordinary man born next door to Jesus Christ, who spends his life being mistaken for a Messiah. And society completely lost its mind. Religious groups across the world accused the movie of blasphemy before many people had even seen it. Some cities banned screenings outright. Entire nations condemned it. Protests erupted outside cinemas. Television debates turned explosive. In one famous confrontation, John Cleese publicly defended the film against furious critics who believed it mocked Christianity itself. But here's the twist. The movie never actually mocked Jesus. Instead, it targeted blind fanaticism, mob mentality, and society's obsession with following leaders without question. That deeper satire completely flew over the heads of many early critics. Ironically, all the outrage only made the film more powerful. Audiences packed theaters out of curiosity. Young viewers saw it as rebellious genius. Critics slowly began recognizing its sharp intelligence hidden beneath absurd comedy. Today, Life of Brian is widely considered one of the greatest satirical films ever made, but at the time, simply watching it felt almost forbidden. What made the controversy even bigger was the film's fearless humor. Scenes involving religious ceremonies, political movements, and public executions pushed boundaries most studios would never dare touch. Yet beneath every outrageous joke was a brutal commentary on how easily society can be manipulated. And decades later, many people believe its message is more relevant than ever. That's the strange legacy of Life of Brian. A movie attacked as dangerous in its era eventually became celebrated as brilliant social satire. But when it first arrived, it wasn't just a comedy. It was a cultural war zone on film. 5. The Deer Hunter, 1978. The war film that divided an entire generation. When The Deer Hunter exploded into theaters in 1978, audiences expected another dramatic war movie. What they got instead was something far darker, more haunting, and deeply controversial. A brutal psychological journey that left viewers emotionally shattered and sparked fierce national debate. Directed by Michael Cimino and starring powerhouse performances from Robert De Niro, Christopher Walken, and Meryl Streep, the film followed a group of working-class friends whose lives are destroyed by the horrors of the Vietnam War. But it wasn't just the violence that shocked audiences, it was the film's infamous Russian roulette scenes that pushed viewers over the edge. The sequences were so intense that many critics accused the movie of exploiting trauma for entertainment. Veterans groups argued the film distorted history and portrayed Vietnamese captors in a dangerously stereotypical way. Some viewers walked out of theaters unable to finish it. Others called it one of the most emotionally devastating films ever made. And yet, controversy only made the movie bigger. The film became a cultural phenomenon, earning massive box office success and winning 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Christopher Walken delivered a performance so disturbing and unforgettable that it instantly became legendary in Hollywood history. But the real reason the movie remains controversial even today is because it forced America to confront something many people wanted to avoid: the psychological scars of war. At a time when the nation was still divided over Vietnam, this film ripped open wounds that had barely begun to heal. Even decades later, critics still debate whether The Deer Hunter is a masterpiece or emotional manipulation disguised as art. But one thing is undeniable: once audiences experienced it, they never forgot it. And that's exactly what made it one of the most controversial films ever unleashed on society. 4. Taxi Driver, 1976. The film that turned a mirror on society's darkness. In 1976, audiences walked into cinemas expecting a gritty character study, but walked out unsettled, disturbed, and in many cases, deeply divided. Taxi Driver didn't just tell a story, it dragged viewers straight into the mind of a man slowly unraveling in a city that never sleeps, but also never cares. Robert De Niro's Travis Bickle isn't your typical hero. He's lonely, isolated, and mentally unstable, drifting through the neon-lit streets of New York as a taxi driver by night and a ghost by day. What made the film so controversial wasn't just its violence, it was how uncomfortably real his descent felt. There were no clear villains, no comforting moral boundaries, just a man and a society that seems to ignore him until it's too late. The most shocking part for audiences came as Travis begins to convince himself that violence is not only justified, but necessary. The film doesn't glorify his actions. Instead, it forces viewers to sit in the discomfort of understanding how alienation can twist a human mind into something dangerous. That blurred line between sympathy and horror is exactly what sparked outrage and debate across the world. When it released, critics were split. Some called it a masterpiece of modern cinema. Others labeled it dangerous, claiming it might influence unstable viewers. The controversy only grew stronger after real-world events were loosely and often unfairly linked to the film, pushing it into even darker headlines. Yet, despite, or because of, all the backlash, Taxi Driver became a defining moment in cinema history. It didn't just entertain, it challenged, provoked, and exposed uncomfortable truths about urban decay, loneliness, and mental health that many preferred to ignore. Decades later, it remains one of the most analyzed and debated films ever made, a reminder that sometimes the most controversial stories are the ones that reflect society a little too honestly. 3. Natural Born Killers, 1994. In the mid-90s, when Hollywood was still testing how far it could push audiences, Natural Born Killers arrived like a lightning strike that split opinions straight down the middle. Directed by Oliver Stone and written from a story by Quentin Tarantino, the film follows Mickey and Mallory Knox, two lovers turned spree killers who become twisted media celebrities in a world obsessed with violence. But this wasn't just a crime story, it was a brutal, chaotic mirror held up to society itself. What made Natural Born Killers so controversial wasn't only its disturbing subject matter, but the way it was presented. Rapid-fire editing, shifting film formats, surreal visuals, and exaggerated news coverage made the audience question what was real and what was media manipulation. Many critics accused the film of glorifying violence, while others argued it was the exact opposite, a savage satire exposing how entertainment culture feeds on tragedy for ratings and attention. The backlash was immediate and intense. The film was blamed by some for inspiring real-world violence, leading to censorship debates, lawsuits, and edited versions released in different countries. Yet despite the outrage, it became a cult phenomenon, forcing society to confront an uncomfortable question: are we consuming violence, or are we being consumed by it? Even decades later, Natural Born Killers, 1994, remains one of cinema's most polarizing statements, proof that sometimes the most controversial films are the ones that reflect us too clearly. 2. The Last Temptation of Christ, 1988, the film that sparked global outrage. When Martin Scorsese released The Last Temptation of Christ in 1988, the backlash exploded almost instantly. Religious groups protested outside theaters, petitions flooded studios, and some countries even attempted to ban the film completely. But what exactly made this movie so controversial? The answer lies in one shocking idea. The film dared to portray Jesus as deeply human. Based on the novel by Nikos Kazantzakis, the movie follows Jesus struggling with fear, temptation, doubt, and desire. The most explosive moment comes during a dreamlike sequence where Jesus imagines living a normal life, including marriage and intimacy. For many believers, that concept crossed a line Hollywood had never touched before. And yet, the film was never intended as mockery. Willem Dafoe delivers an intense and emotional performance as Jesus, portraying him not as untouchable perfection, but as a man wrestling with destiny. That interpretation divided audiences straight down the middle. Some called it blasphemous. Others praised it as one of the boldest spiritual films ever made. The outrage became massive. Protesters picketed theaters across America. Some cinemas received threats. In France, violent attacks were even linked to screenings of the movie. Major religious organizations demanded boycotts, turning the film into an international media storm before many people had even watched it. Ironically, the controversy only made the movie more famous. People who had never heard of the film suddenly wanted to see what all the chaos was about. Critics began debating whether art should be allowed to challenge religion, and the movie quickly transformed from a simple release into a global cultural battleground. Today, The Last Temptation of Christ is still considered one of the most controversial films ever made, not because of gore or violence, but because it questioned how society views faith itself. And decades later, it remains a powerful reminder that sometimes the most dangerous thing a movie can do is make people think. 1. Brokeback Mountain, 2005. The love story that shook Hollywood. When Brokeback Mountain hit theaters in 2005, it didn't just tell a story, it ignited a cultural earthquake. Directed by Ang Lee, the film follows two cowboys, played by Heath Ledger and Jake Gyllenhaal, who form a deep emotional and physical bond in the rugged isolation of the American West. But in a world built on masculinity, silence, and tradition, their love becomes something forbidden, something dangerous. What made the film so controversial wasn't just its subject matter, it was the fact that it stripped away stereotypes and forced audiences to confront a truth many weren't ready to see. Love doesn't always fit society's expectations. Across parts of the United States, the film faced backlash, bans, and heated debates. Some theaters refused to screen it, while critics and audiences clashed over its Oscar loss controversy, calling it a snub heard around the world. Yet despite the resistance, it became a cultural milestone, reshaping LGBTQ+ representation in mainstream cinema. Today, Brokeback Mountain stands as more than a film, it's a turning point. A quiet, heartbreaking reminder that the most controversial stories are often the ones that feel the most human. And that's exactly why it still gets talked about decades later. And that wraps up our journey through 10 of the most controversial films ever unleashed on society. Movies that didn't just entertain, but challenged beliefs, sparked outrage, and changed cinema forever. From banned screenings to global debates, each of these films proved one thing: storytelling has power, and sometimes that power makes people uncomfortable. Now we want to hear from you. Which film shocked you the most, and which one do you think didn't deserve the controversy? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your opinion might just spark the next big debate on Globewise TV. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Globewise TV for more deep dives into the boldest, strangest, and most unforgettable stories from film history. And remember, on Globewise TV, we don't just watch movies, we explore the stories that change how the world sees them. See you in the next video.